Aliens have been a topic of human discussion since the beginning of our ability to tell stories. I don't know where I actually stand on aliens, to be honest with you. Somewhere between religion and madness. But if aliens did show up, I think this is the way they would do it. A rustling in the sheets woke Sura with an urgent sweat. She thought to herself, he does have a tendency to wiggle his feet restlessly in the night. So she closed her eyes back, forcing them shut, and tried to ignore the peculiar knot in her stomach, the kind of knot that creeps into your throat. Now, their sheets were a light pea green color, and she hated them. But for some reason, he loved this color. And he doesn't ask for much around the house, so she conceded the sheets, despite their room being painted an earth tone brown. She didn't like how the colors mixed at all, and she laid there thinking about how she really hated the color of their sheets. Her mom never liked green, and for a split second, she was overcome with the thought that she's more like her mother than she realized. He also demanded one other thing, which crept into the back of her head, and she couldn't ignore it in the den, the one thing that she has rarely ever touched, the one thing that always gave her pause, the oak cabinet that he put in the den and kept under lock and key. She secretly loved the look of this cabinet. It had hand-carved symbols all over it. She thought they were Native American symbols or something obscure like that. But he only ever talked about it once when they moved in, and said they belonged to his ancestral tribe, hence the Native American idea. This puzzled her because he looked Caucasian to her, and none of his family seemed to come from a tribe. But he's a little weird, and she liked that about him, so she didn't look into it. It was his weirdness that drew her in the first place. Anyway, it is very pretty, and it's in his den where he does his work, so no harm, no foul there. The rustling continued, though. She called over to him, trying to maintain a playful disposition despite her growing fear and knowing he was probably asleep. "Babe, stop it!" There was no reply. In fact, she didn't even know if he was there. But the rustling did stop, and she tried to doze off again. She hated the sheets as she laid there with her eyes closed, feeling sleep creep back into her mind. But she did love their bed, a king-size Tempur-Pedic, and she melted into it. The bed was his idea. She maintains it was the best decision he ever made. She's a chiropractor and an avid swimmer, so she appreciates the health benefits of having a great night's sleep. She swam in high school, and it was the one thing she was able to do that gave her complete peace. She always said that the quiet is purest underneath when you're gliding in the wetness. They bought the bed before she even decided to go back to school to be a chiropractor. She used to be as unhealthy as the rest of sedentary America, spending nights watching TV and days at a desk. She had gained 40 pounds and hadn't stepped foot in the water in 2 years before she finally decided to change her life. A slow hum, that rustling just on the surface and just beneath those sheets, those pea green sheets. It was almost a presence, not even a sound. And then the rustling started again. She had an overwhelming sense of disturbance now. She popped her eyes back open, the same disturbance she had felt all her life. Everything was rushing towards her. The sweat started pouring from her brow. All the while, she stared into the blackness of her ceiling, hoping, praying it would go away. She was almost embarrassed to pray, and not because she didn't believe in God, because she had never prayed before. She had never bothered. She was a strong woman that really relied on her own skills and thought, man, if I have to pray, what kind of person am I? And now, in her moment of most need, she felt embarrassed, like she hadn't earned the right to pray. She heard her mother's voice in the back of her head saying, Why are you marrying him? She questioned all of her choices, not 5 minutes after smiling about them. This is a man she's known all her life. Why did I marry my high school sweetheart? Why Why did I agree to these pea green sheets? Why? Why is there a cabinet in his den that I can't go in and touch? Why is it there? The intensity of the rustling slowly grew. She thought about the pea-colored sheets. It gave her some sort of peace in the midst of all this. It was such a happy day when they bought them. She hated the color, but she loved the memory of shopping for them. They laughed in the middle of Macy's while debating which sheet set to get. He had a seductive humor that only melted her heart every time. His big smile always made her feel like she was the center of the universe. But there was anger, too. At the slightest thing, he would snap from 0 to 100. And it was terrifying. He had never touched her, never hit her. But the look on his face was like he transformed into something else, something inhuman. But she chalked it up to a childhood that he spoke little about. She didn't know. She actually had always assumed that he was abused and that his anger was a product of that and that he just needed support. But maybe there was something else. In high school, she met him because he sat behind her in English class. And while in class, debating whether or not Jean was trying to kill Finney in a separate piece, he smelled her from the desk behind. He was so cute. So she laughed and played with him. Every time he smiled at her and tried to smell her from behind, playfully, she knew that she would give in to whatever he asked. The rustling now seemed to be upon her. It seemed angry almost, like it was clawing at her skin. She felt the goosebumps and almost like scratches were on her arms. She tightened her eyes closed and remembered the one time she tried to open his cabinet. She remembered the anger. He did not shout. He didn't get physical either. It was a muted anger, and it was somehow worse. It made her tremble to think of it, while the rustling seemed to be shaking her entire body. He was at work that day, and she had off. She was cleaning the house. She didn't like cleaning, but she couldn't stand to live in a house that was dirty. The den always gave her a funny feeling, like it was watching her. Like she didn't belong there. As long as she stayed in the kitchen or the living room, she didn't feel it, but as soon as she walked close to that den door, she felt like someone was judging her. When she was in college, she went with her friends to an opera, and she wore a dress with a low cut, and it revealed her tattoo across her upper back. The people at the opera stared at her with unrelenting disdain. She tried to act different, even above it, but she couldn't help feeling embarrassed and sad. She refused to get a tramp stamp, but she loved tattoos, so she got it on her upper back. It was of a maple tree. It reminded her of her mother, and she felt like her mom would always be there with her. But that's how she felt every time she walked past the den. Embarrassed, sad, and even scared. Her mom hated him. She always hated him since they were 15 years old. She always told her that he was not right for her. It drove a rift between her and her mom for a while because nobody wants to be told not to date somebody or not to see somebody, or not to be friends with somebody. Nobody wants that. And kids will always rebel. All of this is pouring through her head in a matter of split seconds while she lays there. That rustling sound upon her. And she remembered when her mom died, getting that package in the mail. All that was in it was a maple leaf, and delicately written on the leaf with beautiful gold paint was, "We are creatures of the earth. I love you." At the time, she just figured it was her mom's hippie attitude, and she really liked it, and she still has it. It's sitting on her desk. She looks at it every day. But she never really thought about why her mother wrote that until right now. Even he loved it. He said her mother was a poet. He was always indifferent to her hatred for him. It was totally weird. It was like she wasn't in the same world as him, so why would he bother? It's almost like a bird pecking at your window, or an ant crawling on you, or a fly. He really didn't think about it as a normal person would. But at the same time, she remembered trying to open this cabinet on that day when she was cleaning. Her heart was racing. She was nervous, almost scared, like I said. It wasn't the kind of fear you feel when your bank account is low or the kind you feel when your pet is sick. It was deep. It was in her bones. As she yanked on the doors with all her might, they wouldn't budge. Even a front door with a bolt lock will move a little. His cabinet seemed sealed. And it was then she felt the vibration. She chalked it up to fear at the time, like that excitement vibration you get before a roller coaster or before hunting or before you do something that really excites you, but it wasn't that. Now, in the midst of this rustling in the middle of the night, she knows that vibration was something telling her that you are not wanted. She did not belong there, and at that time she left, and as she was leaving, she felt like she did when she was little and pretended that a monster was following her. It was a game she played, and she would get butterflies in her stomach from pretending it was so real, and she would run away back home. She tried to run away now. She forced herself to think of something else. She forced herself to pull the covers off. She tried to force herself to open her eyes and just look towards him. She couldn't. She laid there and thought about that day she tried to open the cabinet. She had assumed that no one would ever know the difference. But when he came home, he immediately went into the den. It was almost like trance-like. He walked in the front door, turned right, went right into the den, and he came back out not a minute later. And he didn't look angry. He just looked frightened. And she thought, man, I've never seen him frightened. She noticed his eyes. She always loved his eyes. They were green. But it wasn't the color she loved. It was the wonder behind the color. And when she looked into his eyes, she could get lost in a fantasy. And that was priceless to her. But that night, after he went into the den, he looked more frightened and his eyes turned gray. And she was terrified. She wanted him to yell at her. She longed for a knockdown, drag-out fight because the look in his eyes, that gray, deadish fear, terrified her to her bones. It was at this thought that she forced her eyes closed. She wasn't even going to try to open them anymore. She lied there with the rustling, that dull vibration now encompassing her body, while that rustling sound just penetrated the entire house. It was angry. It clung to her like a sticky feeling in high humidity. Her fear was boundless and evermore. She felt it now in her soul. It was almost an acceptance. It was a fear her mother tried to alleviate her whole life. She had always felt it, waking up in the middle of the night as a kid, pretending those monsters were after her. And now, as she laid there, she only realized that she was angry too. She was angry her whole life, but it wasn't explainable. There was no reason for it. And she just thought about her mother's leaf. She reached over to the nightstand as if it was there, but it wasn't. She grabbed that air, and she didn't know what to do except for open her body to this rustling sound, which now was vibrating all over her, forcing her clothes to shudder like leaves in the wind. She finally decided to look over where he was, or where she thought he should be. She had to confront the fear that lied dormant inside of her, the anger that suddenly poured through her. She turned her head right over there with her eyes still closed, and she blurted out one more time, one more grasp at the life that she thought that was hers. She said, "Babe, please." She rolled onto her back one more time, took one last deep breath, breathing in that vibration smell of fear. Opened her eyes at the ceiling instead of at him. The air seemed to leave the room. Her mother's leaf printed on her brain as she looked at the ceiling. She clung to that image, thinking about, "We are creatures of the earth, and I love you," before turning her head left one more time with her eyes wide open 2 days later, the cops emptied out Sura's house. No one was there. Both of their work reported them missing. The cops showed up for a wellness check. Couldn't get anybody to answer. Knocked, and finally they let themselves in. The entire house was empty. The only thing they had to take was that wooden chest in the den. It was so heavy, it took 3 cops and a dolly to wheel it out, even though it was no bigger than the size of a shoe chest at the end of the bed. Sura was never heard from again. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you're new here at Eclectic Stories, check out Hollow Tree, a verbal retelling of a novel, which you can also read for free on Substack. Thanks, guys.